Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Chris Shang, and today we've got Rand Fishkin, who's super happy to have him on. He's currently co-founder and CEO of SparkToro, but also is a former CEO and founder of Moz, which I think a lot of our audience probably would be familiar with. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure, Chris. Good to be here.
Of course. Tell us a little bit about SparkToro. What are you guys doing? What kind of companies are you guys working with there? Seems super interesting from what you described.
Yeah. So SparkToro is audience research software. It is kind of for everyone. We have about, I think Casey said we have 200,000 people using the free version.
Okay.
So tons of folks using the free version and about 1,500 customers who range from enterprises. There's a couple of Fortune 1000 companies who are subscribers and lots of small and medium businesses, lots of agencies and consultants, boards of economic trade and development, universities, researchers, influencers, podcasters, plenty of podcasters. So quite a wide distribution. I would say, Chris, the one thing they share in common is that they need to solve the problem. So essentially, if you are very curious about where can I reach my audience online that is not just throwing money at Google and Facebook, SparkToro can usually help with that.
And you mentioned these also just before we kind of get into your backstory, but you're sharing a lot of demographic data around what they're consuming. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, so behavioral and demographic data. So for example, if you were to say, gosh, I really want to know more about people who play Dungeons and Dragons. You look like, I bet we would have a lot of fun playing Dungeons and Dragons together. I don't know if you actually play, but let's say you were creating a new, I don't know, board game, right? And you thought, oh, I want my new board game to reach, Dungeons and Dragons players. That's who I think one of my big target markets is. So you could search SparkToro for something like, I want to find people who, whatever, visit the Dungeons and Dragons website or search for D&D. And then SparkToro could tell you, well, they subscribe to these YouTube channels, they listen to these podcasts, they visit these subreddits, they search for these keywords in Google, they have these breakdowns of gender and age and geography and job role and title, all that kind of stuff,
Very
which
cool.
would help you with a lot of that targeting stuff.
Got it. Got it. Very cool. So I want to kind of dive into your background, and then we'll come back and make full circle and go back into more about SparkToro and what you guys are learning from that. But uh you've been an entrepreneur several times around, and so I'm curious as to where did that come from? Was that just come always like an innate curiosity from as far back as you can remember? And how did you go about finding those things that you ultimately had a passion around to work on ultimately? Specifically, I think like it's interesting, like you started off doing, web design and development, and you're in it pretty much at like the height of like that tech boom, and you're really kind of like around when we're kind of like in that bubble phase, but also like afterwards, but you were still in it, weren't discouraged. What was that period like for you? How did you find that interest, and how did you stomach through some of the evolutions of the internet at the time?
God, I mean, I was so young, Chris. It's weird to imagine. I don't know if you conceptualize of yourself as the same person that you were when you were
Yeah.
19 or 20, but I always look back 10 years and I go, "Oh my God, that guy was such an idiot." And I hope when I'm 10 years older than this, maybe I feel that way a little bit less about myself now, but we'll see. Um, I was not intending to be an entrepreneur at all.
Mm.
I do have a um, deeply anti-authoritarian streak. So I think one of my challenges is that I like being told what to do, but I like to understand why. I
Mm-hmm.
really need to understand the why. And if the logic of it makes sense, then wonderful, right? So, if you tell me, hey, Rand, I really want you to create this 1 minute long video on this thing and send it to me to help promote our Thought Leaders podcast, I'll be like, oh, yeah, I get it. Totally. Like, great. Please, I'm happy to do that. But if you tell me, hey, I need you to jump in this swimming pool while holding this 6-pack of beer, why? Why do you need that? So I think that anti-authoritarian bend definitely led me to entrepreneurship. But I was kind of accidental. I joined my mom's small business
Okay.
and then was kind of promoted to CEO through the things that I was doing with Moz and with the blog. We hadn't even intended to start an SEO business. It came about organically through getting frustrated at Google and then teaching people how to do it right.
Yeah. I mean, I bring that up. I agree with you in terms of the sense of the perspective of looking back, 10 some years ago and just like, you don't know what you there's a certain level I feel like of ignorance is bliss in that process though too, right? Because you don't know how hard it is
Yeah.
really because you're kind of like in it and you're ignorant to it. I think it's also similar though to today, right? Like you have kids that are 18, 19, I mean, even younger than that have such, easy access to crazy amounts of technology now that really allows them to have no bounds, right? And I think if their natural curiosity is really strong, it could take them a very far ways. And so I think there's some mirrorings around that.
That's a good
Um,
point.
you mentioned though too, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I
Yeah.
think we talk to like all kinds of like experts across like AI and data, and I mean it there's so much there, I think like that people can run with.
Yeah,
But
one of the frustrations, like when you and I were coming, I don't know if you're my age exactly, but when we were early in our careers, is that the internet didn't have that much information.
yeah,
So like when I wanted to learn about what it was like to be a venture-backed entrepreneur, I remember 2007, VCs were emailing me and I was kind of like, gosh, what is this world? I Googled venture capital and then I tried to learn everything I could, but there just wasn't that much information. There were very few stories. When I tried to learn SEO in 2002, 2003, there was no good information on the internet. I actually think that's what built my career there was like being able to learn a thing and then share how that thing worked. And a lot of people who know me today, certainly who associate me with SEO, do that because, oh, that's Rand's how I learned SEO, that kind of thing.
exactly. Which is out by necessity, right? And
Yeah.
that's kind of I think that's an interesting thing because, now the issue probably isn't the technology because you could very easily not even have to spend a ton of time going into these rabbit holes of like learning expeditions through Google or YouTube like we had to go through to kind of figure things out. But you can query them pretty quickly and get like extensive guides around the basics of how to do stuff, right? And then
Yeah.
get pretty comprehensive around it. I
I
think
think
the
that, oh, sorry.
oh go for it.
I was going to say, I think one of the biggest challenges now is information literacy.
Yeah.
So there's so much content, and an overwhelming majority of it, unfortunately, is somewhere between lacking depth and context or straight up misleading.
Yep.
And I think one of the challenges that I really feel for young folks today, and to be fair, I'm somewhat empathetic to this because I face this challenge myself, is when I try to learn about a topic on the internet, whether it's YouTube or Instagram Reels or Reddit or whatever it is, there's a lot of rabbit holes you can go down that will lead you to incorrect or unhelpful or straight up wrong beliefs. And this, I'm not just talking about the political world, right? Like on any topic online, there are people who have an incentive to give you bad information. And unfortunately, Google is imperfect. They do not rank the best, most correct stuff at the top. I was complaining yesterday. I did a search, Chris, I don't know if you cook, but I did a search for the best kind of rice for risotto, which is, like the Italian dish. And
Hmm.
it says the wrong kind of rice. The wrong kind of rice is like big, bold, right at the top of Google. And I thought to myself, man, how many people must go to the grocery store,
Yeah.
search for that, buy the wrong rice, and then have a bad experience and they're like, I guess I can't make it at home.
Yeah, I mean,
Infuriating.
I agree, I get it, right? And I think that's like, oh, I mean, yeah, I think there's an entire different um plethora of challenges today. And but I think there's some of that might mirror. So let's kind of go into this, which is when you first got into it, you're seeing the challenges with Google, and so you got into the SEO game. You mentioned real quick that, or alluded to that you had, worked with your mom's company. So there was like some like entrepreneurship at home, right?
That's true. Yeah.
What was that company that she was that you became a part of there?
I mean, it was just her. She was a
Okay,
solo consultant, right? She helped people
got
do
it.
marketing in the Pacific Northwest, like logos,
Okay.
letterhead, yellow pages ads, if you remember
Yes.
those, right?
Yes.
All that kind of stuff.
Oh, very cool. Okay, so you got involved in marketing very young age, and then you took on the digital reins of essentially that to drive awareness. Got it.
Exactly.
That's
That's how I got
wonderful.
into web design, right? Because in the
Yep.
late 90s, her clients started needing websites.
Yep.
And she brought home a copy of like Mosaic browser and front page and Macromedia Dreamweaver, if you remember that
Yep.
product. And
Yep.
I was like, oh my God, I can make things on the internet. It
Yeah, I remember
was
that
great.
too. Um, Very cool. And so, kind of getting that access helped you then understand some of the gaps that were there. And then, in that market at that time.
Yeah.
Um, And so how did you I mean, what was the revelation in SEO and then really like knowing or whatever, maybe not knowing exactly, but what was the gut instinct that you're feeling around SEO that you knew that this was going to be the next thing, or maybe you didn't know it was going to be the next thing, but it's something that you felt like you needed to understand to get the same outcome or better outcome than what you guys were seeing with what you guys already knew.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think the parallels here between Moz and SparkToro, maybe even my other company, Snackbar, but Moz and SparkToro are very evident in that in 2000, 2001, we started getting, right, we were building websites and making logos and that kind of stuff. And we started getting requests from our customers saying, hey, we want to be found in search engines. Google was starting to get mentioned, but really it was like Yahoo, MSN, Lycos, InfoSeek, Dogpile, like that. It was that whole era of, 18 different search engines. But our clients were telling us, hey, we need our websites to be found in search engines. And the websites that you had been making us were made in Flash, which look pretty, but they can't rank well in search engines because search engines couldn't parse the Flash code and couldn't see all the different pages, et cetera. So I had to learn SEO to help our clients. And similarly, when I left Moz, it was the same kind of thing where lots of people were coming to me at Moz and through other activities that I had, boards of directors that I was on, that kind of thing. And they went, no one is searching Google for the thing that we do. So how do we market to them? Like, how do
Mm,
we reach them through the places where they pay attention? And I was like, oh, yeah, there's no software out there that tells you what a group of people pays attention to
mm-hmm.
because everything has become so search centric in the digital marketing content world. We need that, right? And so that's what led me to make SparkToro.
Interesting. It's kind of, I guess, centered on the idea of going where the attention is ultimately, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, right, you know that you need to have a not just a great idea, but also a market that wants that problem solved. And
Mm-hmm.
then in order to reach that market who wants their problem solved, you need to know where they go to get answers around the problem today.
Yeah.
And that list of channels is infinitely long, but if you prioritize the wrong ones, you are going to waste a ton of time. You're probably going to run out of money before you ever turn a profit.
Yeah. Super interesting. In between that time too, you also wrote a book, right? Lost and Founder.
I did. Yeah, that was sort of as I was leaving Moz. That book was published and with Penguin, and sort of describes this journey from accidental entrepreneur to venture-backed CEO, raising lots of rounds, getting deep into the tech world, and then realizing that for lots of reasons the venture asset class wasn't a match for me. And I would argue, I think most VCs would argue, it's not a match for 99% of companies.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, it's marketed to all of us. And so Lost and Founder has become over the last few years, it's sort of a book that a lot of people pass around when they're considering how they want to build and structure and fundraise for their companies.
Yeah. Um, with SparkToro and Snack Bar, did you raise any external capital for that? Yep.
Yeah, I did. Both businesses raise money in a very similar fashion. No VCs, only individual angels. Lots of folks like yourself, right? Lots of folks who
Uh,
are sort of CEOs of their own businesses or have been in startup world, CEOs of agencies and consulting groups and that kind of thing. And both companies basically, SparkToro raised 1.3 million in 2018. And then the way that our docs are structured, we have to pay back our investors that 1.3 million before Casey and I, the founders, can raise our salaries. And then the only way that we make more money after we sort of hit that limit is to pay dividends.
Yep.
And that is something we plan to do. So we actually paid back our investors last year, which was amazing. It was about 4.5 years to pay them back their original sum. And now, the hope is SparkToro keeps being profitable and continues to grow. And so the hope is that, next year after, we can make maybe a 20%, 25% dividend payment and do that every years, get investors back 3 or 4x their money, and maybe someday sell the company, or maybe not. Maybe just keep running it and paying dividends for decades to come.
Yeah. Awesome. Very cool. Um, and when it came to making the decision of how you wanted to structure that, were a lot of these, was a lot of this capital also like strategic in that way, where it sounds like they could possibly all be partners or potential customers as well?
I would say, if I look at the cap table for SparkToro, we have 35 angel investors. I would say about maybe 10 to 15 of them are potentially people who would use the product and benefit from it for their
Right.
own companies or agencies. And the other 20 are more probably less in that world.
Yep.
Maybe occasionally they might, um, but more, I think, people who saw the promise of it
Yep. Very cool.
and were interested that way. And I think also, one of the things that I've been working really hard to do, Chris, is, if you see a problem in the market, the challenge that I see is venture capital is sold to every single entrepreneur, and it is a terrible path. Even VCs will tell you it's a terrible path for 99% of companies. So what's the alternative? Like when I left Moz, I didn't have enough money to start SparkToro. I couldn't have bootstrapped it. It took, 18 months to build the software and get the data and, all this stuff, do all the market validation. There's no way to bootstrap, especially not with my co-founder too. And so we needed capital right away. A bank loan wasn't going to do the trick. So we had to invent our own asset class,
Mm.
essentially. And one of the things that I want to do with SparkToro, with Snackbar, I'm on the board of directors of a hardware company, actually, that raised money using SparkToro's documents. So same structure. And all three of these businesses, my hope is like, 5 years from now, 7 years from now, those companies can become role models for a new class of entrepreneur who wants to build something, and a new class of investor too. Investors also have to put, a huge number of bets to have it pay off the way VC works. But in this case, right, if it's a lower risk, higher chance of getting your money back model, you can afford to put money into these types of companies without that same risk. And that's something that I would love to see in the world of entrepreneurship overall.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like, yeah, I mean, I think that's,
Did you guys raise for Leader Pro?
we raised in total about 1.6.
Okay,
I still own 51% of it, which was important to me. And then,
very nice. Yeah,
and we're profitable. So fortunately we don't have to raise anymore.
awesome.
Um, but I think like, I agree with you. I mean, I think like we were fortunate enough because I still have an ongoing relationship with an accelerator called Mucker out here in LA, that they were the ones that kind of bet on me and putting the initial funds for me to sunset a profitable lifestyle business agency to then build a more scalable version of what we're delivering from there.
Yeah.
Um, which is super interesting. I mean, I think like I think about so oftentimes too, like what have I learned from this exercise and what would I do differently, or how, and I still work with a lot of founders, especially from the 0 to 1 motion. And so it's like you still see these personalities, and I'm sure you've seen them a lot too, where it's like you can start categorizing, for better or worse, the hurdles that they're going to run into, a lot of times based on where they're pushing back or where they're adopting in terms of how they go to market, especially especially in those early days. Um, and I think there is, I think about it, I thought about this past week, but like if I was to do it all over, like I think like really kind of like building a wait list almost of like customers that I know are experiencing extreme amount of pain for whatever the solution is, right? You can build whatever solution, but to really understand the pain from the narrative of the end user's perspective, at scale to the point where you have hundreds or thousands of them already that you've spoken to, I think that would be getting to a certain level of critical mass. So
Yeah.
I had a question around that, which is with people, how they use SparkToro is, are they using it more from already like having a product or to develop a product, or in both cases, like where they're trying
Definitely both.
both? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I would say it's probably 70-30, 70% of people who already have an existing product that they're selling. And then I'd say 30% who are, especially a lot of the student programs at universities that use SparkToro, economic boards of trade and development, some accelerator programs and investors, those folks, lots of like ideation,
Yep.
right, where they're trying to figure it out. But then 70% are folks are using it for help me market this product that I already have.
Yep. Yes.
One of the things, to your point though, Chris, SparkToro started exactly the way you're describing. So we had two, there's two of us who are founders, Casey and myself. There's now three of us, Amanda and Natividad, who's near you in LA.
Yep.
Um, and the two of us basically took two different paths. Like Casey built this product, over the 18 months post funding, and I had lots of conversations with potential customers, published on our blog, spoke at events, went on podcasts and interviews, did lots of live webinars and all that kind of stuff, lots of social posting, especially on LinkedIn and Twitter before all the things that have happened to it,
Yep.
and built up 20,000 people who said, I want SparkToro, right? We had a wait list and a landing page. And then when I think we hit March of 2020, which was not like the worst time to try and launch anything, but we hit March of 2020 and started sending invites out to our wait list and then seeing the responses. And because of that, we were able to reach profitability by, I think it was either October or November of 2020.
Mm.
Just incredible, right? Basically,
Yep.
over those next 6 months, the wait list that we had, plus the excitement that they generated in the rest of our community, is what got the product initially over the hump of break even, and
Yep.
then it was kind of off to the races. So I cannot recommend that strategy you described enough.
Yeah. I mean, we are fortunate enough. I think the reason why we were able to get profitable so quickly was because we were delivering on a pain for our clients through an agency, through a service-based business. So we already knew that that existed, but if we
Right.
could do it at scale, then that was the idea of like, how do you go from 30 to 300 to 3,000? Because we're kind of capped out at like 30. And so, I think even when we launched, we were fortunate because we moved about 80% of our customers as our beta, like our clients from the agency to become beta customers. And so we didn't launch with like a fully automated product. It was maybe 60% automated, and forward facing will look like it, but there's still a lot of manual work in the back end. And so we had 3 months to really kind of harness all that feedback to then get it to a place where it was 99% of the way automated. And I think that's the way to go to definitely like build something. I think obviously there's other shifts in a macroeconomic environment that you have no control over.
Yep.
I just like for us too, the challenge has been the pullback in spending and around just SaaS in general, and having that been such a bull market for so many years already, for greater part of a decade. Uh, and so, yeah, we're just seeing a little bit of people pulling back there, but curious as to like, great. I think like that's a great way to build a business with SparkToro. Um, you guys are been around for quite a while now, profitable, paid back, paying dividends. In terms of where that attention class is, how are you thinking about either getting deeper with what you guys are doing now or even expanding? Because I think about like, and I don't know if you guys think about this, but like, do you think of people, how do people search? How does the next generation search or discover, right? Because I
Hmm.
feel like a lot of them now are for better or worse, again, like on these platforms, maybe buying things unnecessarily, but doing it through TikTok or doing it through Instagram. And and all these tools have the AI built into it now, whether they know it or not. I
Yeah.
don't think the general population fully understands how much they're actually feeding the algorithms and the learnings of these big models, but they're interacting with it and it's part of the search functionalities now. So curious as to how you think about that. How how do you guys access that data or that pool of audience with that attention?
Yeah. So we do, I would say we think about the future a little bit, but not, I don't obsess about it much.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really interesting about marketing, and I would coach anyone who thinks about marketing to think this way, is that you don't need to be ahead of your customers.
Hmm.
So in entrepreneurship, a lot of the time what you're trying to do is think 3 steps ahead. Like in the future, X will be true, which means next year Y will be true, which means this year if I do Z, I can conquer X, which will lead me, whatever. You can see that path ahead. You don't have to do that in marketing. In marketing, you really don't want to do that. In fact, you will often make huge investments that are complete mistakes by going to, for example, let's say, you told me that, hey, I think kids are going to start buying a lot of their, media recommendations and like consumption is going to come through large language models. And so
Hmm.
I'm going to start doing a lot of work to get my brand and media stuff talked about in the places that will get them into the large language models. And so ChatGPT will return my stuff. I would squint really hard and scratch my head on that. I don't think that makes sense. Even if you believe that's true, even if 5 years from now that is true, I would argue that today you should not do that. You should
Yeah.
spend your energy going to the places where your audience already is, where they're paying attention now, because audience attention is very fickle. Habits are incredibly hard to predict sector to sector, and there's no real value in being in a place before your customers are there.
Hmm.
It doesn't make good sense, right? It's sort of like, for anyone who's done sales emails, it's like sending someone an email a few years before they're ready to even think about your product.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't make good sense, right? It's sort of a waste.
Yeah.
And I would generally say that with SparkToro, our because our data comes from well, one of the three big sources is clickstream data. So I mean, we have a big panel from Datos that we work with, so we can sort of see what all these millions of people are doing on the web, all the websites they visit. And so if we start to see a platform take off,
Hmm.
as an example, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, we definitely did see OpenAI.com and now ChatGPT.com take off, right? Like you can see the acceleration. And so that comes into our data naturally, right? So when OpenAI moved ChatGPT to its own domain, you can now see in SparkToro that like lots of searches in B2B world produce the, the domain chatgpt.com is quite popular with that group. I I think that also gives us kind of an unfair advantage to be able to not see the future, but see the present and look at trend lines, right? So we can look at acceleration, um, and then be there when the attention actually turns that way.
That makes sense. Yeah. So I mean, well, yeah, in your guys' situation, you have it's like I imagine like a trader on the floor where they have the instant access to the
Yeah,
real,
yeah,
right. And even if you're like, if you're on Fidelity, you're making the trade, you're already like 5 minutes late. So it's the the trend has already started. And you
yeah.
can't.
And marketing is not that way, right? Because you don't have to um, you don't have to buy before the top of the market.
Yeah.
The top of the market is actually the greatest time to buy in marketing, right? To go invest in a space. Like, if I could tell people, hey, the best time to do SEO was sort of the golden age of maybe 2012 to 2018, when Google's popularity was absolutely uncontested and not a lot of people were like investing as heavily there, and we didn't have the zero-click search problem that we have today. So I think there will be opportunities in the future. TikTok is an Well, TikTok would be a good example, except that they might get banned in the United States pretty soon, and then that would change that calculus. But I think that platforms like YouTube are huge. I think LinkedIn is still underinvested in by a lot of businesses and companies. And right now, the one that stands out to me the most is Threads. Threads has 175 million active users in only its first year. That is more than half the size of what Twitter was able to achieve in 14 years. 16 years? 16 years. Twitter is declining right now dramatically, and you can see Threads taking up that space. I would bet, I mean, Facebook is very smart. I think they're going to win here. If you're betting against them right now, that the numbers don't show that doing well for you. And I'm shocked, at the engagement that I get on Threads, even with a much smaller following. I'm
Mm,
able to post things there and see them take off like a rocket. I only have like 6,000 followers on Threads, and I think I have almost 500,000 on Twitter. And my tweets don't do nearly as well as my threads.
interesting.
Wow.
Interesting. Very cool. On that note, I know we're up on time, and I want to say thank you so much for taking the time. It was great talking to you, super insightful, lots of great topics and things of interest there.
Yeah, my pleasure, Chris. Great chatting with you as well, and keep in touch.
Sounds good.